Slave sees master's wife crying by the river. What happened next shocked everyone. Georgia, 1834. The sky over the river had been brooding all afternoon, heavy clouds darkening the horizon like a prelude to some inevitable calamity. Eliza Wentworth, the young mistress of the sprawling Georgia plantation, walked along the muddy bank, her skirts soaked to the ankles. Hands clutching a faded handkerchief, she pressed against her trembling lips. Her husband, Richard Wentworth, had been away in Savannah for weeks, and the plantation, silent and oppressive in his absence, offered no comfort. Her body ached with exhaustion from managing the house, the servants, and the constant emptiness that settled like a stone in her chest. She had tried to keep her composure, tried to smile at the overseer and the maids, but it was impossible. No one knew the depth of her loneliness, not the ladies in the county, not the children in town who played with their father's slaves in carefree ignorance. She felt a tightness in her throat as her gaze fell on the river, swollen and dark from the storm approaching. Tears came, unbidden, running freely down her pale cheeks. The sound of footsteps on wet grass made her startle. She turned sharply, hand on her chest, and found herself staring into the dark eyes of Thomas, one of the younger house slaves. Strong, attentive, and quietly perceptive, he had always moved like a shadow in the background, present but unnoticed, except when he was needed. "Mistress?" His voice was low, careful, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile shell she held around herself. Eliza quickly pressed her hand to her mouth, ashamed to have been caught weeping. I am fine," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She had never allowed herself to be seen like this, not by any servant, not by any soul who owed obedience to her husband. Thomas took a hesitant step closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "Mistress, you shouldn't walk by the river alone in this weather. The mud is treacherous, and the rain will." She cut him off with a soft, almost inaudible laugh, brittle and broken. I need to be alone, away from all of it, away from him." Her gaze dropped to the rushing water, her fingers tightening around the handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. There was something in her voice, a crack of vulnerability, that made Thomas hesitate. He had learned to read people, to understand the currents beneath polite words and forced smiles. He sensed the depth of her despair, but he also knew the danger of offering comfort where none was invited. Still, he could not step away. "Mistress," he began again, slower this time, "if you fall, or if the river takes you, you would not dare," she whispered, turning her eyes on him. There was a sharp edge in her tone, a mix of fear and defiance. But even as she spoke, her shoulders shook, and a soft sob escaped. For a long moment, neither moved. The river roared beside them, swollen with the afternoon rain, and the sky broke with a low rumble of thunder. Lightning flashed over the water, illuminating Thomas's young, serious face, and for a brief instant, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, trembling on the riverbank. He stepped closer, almost imperceptibly, and lowered his voice to a careful whisper. "Mistress, you need not suffer alone." Eliza's breath caught. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight she had never felt before, from a man who was not family, not a friend, not supposed to care beyond his station. She looked at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly, and for the first time in months, she felt the stirrings of something dangerous. Relief, recognition, a spark of connection she should not feel. A sudden shout from the main house, the distant call of the overseer, made her jump. Thomas's hand shot out, just a whisper away from hers, as if to steady her without touching her. She felt the warmth of it through the damp air, and a shiver ran down her spine. "Go back, mistress," he murmured urgently. "It is not safe, not here." She nodded, swallowing hard, forcing her tears back. But as she turned, a part of her wanted to look back, wanted to see him again, to feel that unspoken promise in his gaze. The river's roar and the approaching storm masked her footsteps as she hurried back toward the house, her heart pounding with a mixture of shame and forbidden curiosity. Thomas remained on the riverbank, watching her disappear into the mist. His chest tightened. He knew the rules. They were clear, unyielding. Yet, in that brief encounter, he had glimpsed something he could not name, something dangerous, something that promised both peril and connection. He clenched his fists, trying to push the thought away. But as the first drops of rain fell in earnest, he could not stop his mind from returning to her face pale and wet with tears, her lips trembling, her eyes filled with longing and despair. And somewhere deep inside, he realized that this accidental meeting would not be their last. The storm broke fully, rain hammering the river and the fields beyond, washing the plantation in a gray, relentless deluge. Somewhere, beneath the rolling clouds, lightning flashed again, as if marking the beginning of something that would change everything. The storm had grown fiercer by nightfall. Rain lashed against the wide windows of the Wentworth plantation house, drumming an unrelenting rhythm that seemed to echo Eliza's pounding heart. Candles flickered across polished mahogany tables, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits across the walls. She had tried to busy herself in the house, arranging silverware, folding linens, pretending she was unaffected by the emptiness that had haunted her all day. But it was impossible. Every movement, every quiet sigh, reminded her of the absence of the one person she truly could not reach, her husband. A sudden crash of thunder made her start, and the candlelight trembled. Somewhere above, the shutters rattled, and the wind moaned through the gaps in the siding. Eliza's hands shook slightly as she rose from the chair by the parlor window. The storm had torn a branch from the great oak outside, and it had smashed against one of the smaller upstairs windows. Water was seeping in, dripping onto the polished floor in thin, relentless streams. She knew who she had to call. "Thomas," she murmured almost to herself. Her voice was low, tense, with the faintest edge of desperation. He appeared almost immediately, as if he had sensed her need. His footsteps were quiet on the wooden floor, but deliberate, as though he had already anticipated the work that would be required. "Yes, mistress." His voice was calm, steady, a quiet anchor in the storm's chaos. "There's been some damage upstairs. The window. Water is coming in. You must help me fix it, quickly." Her voice had authority, but beneath it lay a fragility she could not hide. Thomas nodded without hesitation, taking the candle from her trembling hands and leading the way up the narrow staircase. The wind pressed against the house violently, the shutters banging, and with each crash of thunder, the old floorboards seemed to shiver underfoot. When they reached the landing, Eliza froze. The window was indeed broken, a jagged shard of glass jutting like a tooth from the frame. Rain poured in through the gap, soaking the delicate wallpaper and curling the edges. She shivered involuntarily, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Thomas crouched, examining the damage. "I can hold a board temporarily," he said, his voice low, careful, "but I will need nails from the cabinet. The tools are heavy. If you'll allow me." Eliza nodded quickly, then realized with a pang that she could not reach the tools on her own. The small cabinet was tall and narrow, and the storm made the room feel impossibly small, every corner shadowed. She stepped closer to Thomas, as though proximity might make her braver. But the moment her hand brushed his sleeve as he reached past her, a spark, small, electric, traveled up her arm, making her gasp softly. Thomas looked up at her, eyes dark and serious in the candlelight. "Mistress?" I am fine," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. The room seemed suddenly too close, too intimate. She could feel the warmth of him in the storm-darkened space, the slight tremor in his strong hands as he worked. She hated herself for noticing it, for being aware of his nearness. And yet, there was something comforting, something thrilling in the danger of their closeness. The storm intensified, wind rattling the glass, rain pouring in through the broken window. Thomas worked quickly, lifting a plank into place and hammering it with skill. Each sound, the hammer's sharp strike, the rain's relentless drum, the distant groan of the house, heightened the tension. Eliza's pulse beat wildly in her chest. Every movement of Thomas, every controlled, purposeful motion, seemed magnified. She fought the impulse to reach out, to steady the plank with him, to linger in the warmth of his presence. "Hold it steady, mistress," he said quietly, his tone almost conspiratorial. She froze, realizing that he had chosen to speak to her, to include her in this moment, though it was dangerous. She extended her hands, brushing the wood as he instructed, and their fingers met briefly. The touch was fleeting, but enough to make her shiver from the intensity of it. The storm howled louder outside. Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the walls of the room. The candle flickered violently, casting shadows that leapt and danced across their faces. Thomas paused, glancing at her. There was a hesitancy in his eyes, a silent question, as if he, too, felt the pull of something forbidden. "Mistress," he said softly, almost a whisper over the storm, "you should not stand so close. The boards are heavy, and—" "I know," she interrupted, breathless, though she did not move away. There was a tension between them, electric, unspoken, charged with both fear and desire. Her pulse raced, her hands trembled, and yet she could not withdraw. Something in his steady presence, his quiet strength, made her feel both protected and dangerously aware of herself. A sudden gust of wind burst through the broken window, sending the candle sputtering. Thomas moved instinctively, reaching past her to shield the flame. Their bodies pressed together briefly in the narrow space, and she felt the heat of him, smelled the faint scent of smoke and earth, the tang of rain on his skin. Her heart threatened to betray her, racing with forbidden longing. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling with something she could not name. He met her gaze, steady, unwavering, and for a moment, the storm outside ceased to exist. It was just the two of them, trapped in this small, storm-battered room, standing perilously close. He could see the vulnerability etched into her delicate features, the tear-streaked cheeks, the trembling lips, and he knew that this closeness, this shared peril, was changing everything. A sudden knock at the door, the heavy, purposeful thud of someone seeking entry, made them both start. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, the danger of discovery felt unbearably real. Eliza's face paled, and she clutched at the shawl around her shoulders as Thomas moved to intercept. "Go to the corner, mistress," he whispered urgently. "Stay out of sight." She obeyed, huddling against the wall, heart hammering, as Thomas opened the door just a crack. Outside, the overseer's voice could be heard, booming over the storm, demanding to know who was upstairs, why the lights flickered. Thomas's pulse thudded in his ears. One wrong word, one misstep, and this moment, this connection, this fragile closeness, could be destroyed forever. He lowered the plank, keeping his back to the door, and when the overseer's voice faded, he exhaled slowly. The danger had passed, for now. Turning back to Eliza, he saw the mixture of fear and exhilaration on her face. "Mistress," he murmured, stepping closer, though careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You must be careful. You cannot let anyone see you like this." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. Yet there was a softness, a vulnerability that she had never shown before. "But I could not stay in the parlor. Not while it rained. Not while the river. Not while everything feels so hollow." Thomas did not reply immediately. He understood more than she could know, the weight of her loneliness, the impossibility of her position, the danger inherent in the smallest connection between them. He only nodded, letting the moment stretch, letting the storm rage around them as their breaths mingled in the candlelit, rain-battered room. For a long time, neither spoke. The room smelled of wet wood and candle wax, the storm outside relentless, and the walls seemed to press in around them. Every heartbeat was magnified, every glance charged with a silent, forbidden understanding. Finally, with a small, almost imperceptible sigh, Thomas returned to the work of securing the window. Eliza watched him, heart aching with both longing and fear. She knew, with a clarity that frightened her, that this encounter had changed something inside her, something she could never unsee, never undo. The rain continued to pour, hammering against the roof and window. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence within, and as Thomas worked in silence, their proximity, their shared danger, and the unspoken understanding between them created a tension neither could ignore. When at last the window was secured, Thomas straightened, dripping and exhausted. He looked at her, eyes soft but serious. "It is done, mistress. You should return to your room. The storm will not cease soon, and it is too dangerous to remain here." Eliza nodded, heart still racing. As she descended the staircase, she dared a glance over her shoulder. Thomas was still there, standing amidst the flickering candlelight and the shadows cast by the storm, a silent guardian, a presence she could not forget. As she reached the safety of her chamber, closing the door behind her, she leaned against it, trembling. Her hand pressed to her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. That night, she would lie awake, haunted by the memory of his hands, the warmth of his presence, the brush of their fingers. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that their lives had shifted irrevocably in the storm's shadow. The night had settled over the plantation like a velvet shroud, thick and still, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the tall pines. The storm had passed, leaving the world damp and gleaming under the pale, watchful moon. Eliza Wentworth could not sleep. She lay in her bed, restless, listening to the soft patter of rain from the storm earlier sliding off the roof, the distant creak of the old house settling in the cool night air. She rose quietly, slipping from her room in bare feet, her skirts brushing the polished floor. The halls were dark and silent, every shadow a reminder of her solitude. Tonight, she told herself, she could not endure the emptiness of her own thoughts any longer. Thomas waited where they had agreed, beyond the edge of the fields, under the sprawling arms of the ancient oak tree that had stood for centuries, gnarled and wise. He had risked much to meet her here, knowing full well the consequences should anyone find them. But he too was restless, carrying in his chest the weight of curiosity, the pull of connection, and the ache of forbidden desire. Eliza reached the edge of the field, her heart pounding in her chest. The moonlight made her pale skin almost glow, casting long shadows that rippled across the wet grass. Thomas stepped forward as she approached, a careful distance between them. His eyes, dark and intense, followed her every movement. "Mistress," he whispered, bowing slightly, though he dared not lower his gaze completely. "You should not be out here alone." "I could not remain in the house," she replied softly, her voice trembling. "Not tonight. After the storm. After the window. I need it. Air." She faltered, unable to find the words for the rest. She looked away, down at the glistening grass, aware of the warmth radiating from him even in the cold night. Thomas moved a little closer, his shadow merging with hers under the silver light. "The fields are dangerous," he warned gently. "You could slip, or—" His words trailed off, unspoken threats lingering in the night. She lifted her gaze to meet his, the pale moon catching the moisture in her eyes. "I do not fear the danger," she admitted quietly, almost to herself. "I fear the emptiness." The air between them grew taut, charged, alive. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them under the oak tree, the fields stretching endlessly behind, the river reflecting the moon in rippling silver. The sound of a distant dog barking made her shiver, reminding her how precarious their meeting was. Thomas swallowed, torn between propriety and the pull he felt toward her. "Mistress," he began, his voice lower now, "I do not wish to overstep, but—" His hand moved slightly, an inch closer to hers, hesitant, aware of the danger in every motion. Eliza's breath caught. The brush of his hand, so near, sent a shiver down her spine. She had never known such a stirring, such a dangerous thrill, and she both yearned and recoiled from it. Her pulse hammered, and she felt the warmth in her cheeks. "Thomas, you must be careful," she whispered, yet the words lacked conviction. He stepped closer, though still careful, respectful, the heat from his body mingling with hers. "And you, mistress, you must be careful too. One wrong step." He gestured to the house, where any servant or overseer could appear at any moment, "and it could mean ruin for both of us." She nodded, trembling, yet unable to move away. The oak's branches arched above them, shielding them partially from the moonlight, giving them a fleeting sense of privacy. She felt a magnetic pull toward him, an unspoken connection that frightened her more than the storm ever could. They began to walk slowly, side by side, across the wet grass. Neither dared speak much, yet the silence itself was a language, a shared confession. She felt the brush of his sleeve against hers, the occasional near touch of fingers that made her chest tighten. Each movement, each glance, seemed magnified, charged with the electricity of their forbidden nearness. I have not felt, I cannot remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have not felt understood in so long." Thomas's step slowed, and he glanced at her profile. The moonlight caught the curve of her cheek, the trembling of her lips. "Mistress, I do not know how to say it." His voice was rough with emotion. "But I understand. I have. I feel it too." The confession hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Eliza's heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might betray her to the night itself. She had never imagined a moment like this, standing in a moonlit field, in the company of a man who was both forbidden and essential, feeling the pull of desire and the ache of loneliness converge into a single, terrifying clarity. They paused beneath the oak tree, shadows flickering across the damp grass. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked earth and the distant river. Thomas's hand moved again, just an inch closer, his fingers brushing hers ever so lightly. Eliza gasped softly, her body trembling. "Thomas," she murmured, fear and longing warring in her voice. "If anyone saw—" "I know," he said, cutting her off gently, eyes intense. "I know, mistress. That is why we must be careful, always careful." Yet neither of them moved away. The distance between their bodies was shrinking, and every stolen glance, every brush of a hand, felt like an act of rebellion against the rigid walls that bound them. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, the strength in his presence, the undeniable pull that neither wanted to resist. A sudden rustle in the grass made them both start. In the moonlight, a shadow flickered, perhaps an animal, perhaps a servant out too late. Eliza's heart leapt into her throat. Thomas's hand hovered near hers, ready to shield her, to guide her away from danger. The moment broke, the spell of intimacy shattering like glass. "It is nothing," he whispered after a tense pause, lowering his hand. "Just a fox, I think. Nothing more." Eliza exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Her knees felt weak, yet her mind was alight with sensation, with danger, with the thrill of being seen so intimately by someone she should not even trust with her thoughts. She began, then faltered, unable to articulate the torrent of emotions within her. Thomas looked at her, reading the conflict in her eyes. "Mistress, I cannot stay long," he said finally. "But I will come again. When it is safe, we will. Speak, and—" "Promise me," she interrupted, her voice a whisper carried by the night wind. "Promise me you will not forget this tonight." He nodded, solemn, almost painfully aware of the stakes. "I promise, mistress. As long as I live, I will not forget." They lingered a moment longer, the air thick with unspoken words and forbidden longing. The moon cast a silver glow over them, illuminating the ache of desire, the fear of discovery, the fragile trust growing between them. Finally, Thomas stepped back, retreating toward the edge of the field. Eliza watched him go, heart heavy with both relief and yearning. She felt as though a part of her had been awakened, a flame that had lain dormant beneath the weight of propriety, loneliness, and fear. When he disappeared into the shadows near the tree line, she dared to breathe fully again, though her pulse continued to race. Her bare feet sank slightly into the wet grass, and she stood alone beneath the moon, the wind tugging at her skirts, the storm-drenched night holding its breath. Eliza knew, with a clarity that terrified her, that this encounter had changed everything. She could not go back to her life as it had been. She could not unsee Thomas, could not unfeel the brush of his fingers, the intensity of his gaze, the quiet understanding he offered in a world that demanded silence. The night stretched on, the moon tracing paths across the fields, and she finally returned to the house, careful, silent, her heart heavy with longing and fear. The candlelight in her room flickered as she entered, casting shadows on the walls that seemed alive, reminding her that the danger of their meetings was real, that every moment stolen beneath the moon could be their undoing. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something exhilarating, something undeniable. A spark had been lit, fragile and precious, in the darkened fields of the Wentworth plantation, and neither of them could pretend, any more, that it might be extinguished. The rain returned with a vengeance that night, hammering against the plantation roof as if the storm itself had not yet been sated. Eliza lay restless in her bed, the damp chill from the previous night still lingering in her skin, her hair tangled from tossing in the sheets. Sleep had fled her, leaving her thoughts consumed entirely by Thomas, by the warmth of his presence, the brush of his hand in the moonlit field, the quiet intensity of his gaze. By the time she rose, it was well past midnight. The house was silent, the halls empty save for the occasional creak of old wood settling under the storm's weight. She wrapped herself in a cloak and stole through the shadows, careful to avoid creaking floorboards. The storm outside had made the fields nearly impassable, but there was one place she trusted for secrecy. The small cabin Thomas had been assigned to for occasional work and storage of supplies. It was secluded, down a narrow path shaded by oak trees, and tonight, the rain masked every step she took. Thomas was waiting, as he always did, standing near the doorway with the faintest light of a single lantern. He glanced up as she approached, his expression unreadable in the dim glow, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his apprehension. "Mistress," he whispered, voice barely audible above the storm, "you should not be here." "The rain." "I had to come," she interrupted, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and longing. "I could not bear the house tonight. Not alone. Not with everything pressing on me." He nodded, understanding the words beneath the words. He opened the door for her, gesturing toward the interior. Inside, the cabin smelled of wet wood, candle wax, and the faint trace of tobacco. The single lantern cast dancing shadows across the walls, throwing their faces into a chiaroscuro of light and darkness. "Sit," Thomas said softly, motioning to a rough wooden bench. She obeyed, her hands trembling as she settled onto it. He remained standing, close but careful, allowing the space between them to exist while still radiating a presence that made her pulse quicken. The storm raged outside, wind and rain battering the cabin walls, yet within, the air was electric with unspoken emotions. Eliza's fingers gripped the edges of her skirts, knuckles white, as she tried to still the tremor in her chest. I do not know why I came," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I know it is foolish and dangerous, and yet—" Thomas moved a step closer, closing the gap by mere inches, though careful to respect the boundaries of propriety and survival. "Mistress," he said softly, "it is not foolish to seek comfort, to seek understanding. We all carry burdens. Yours, yours is heavy." Her eyes filled with tears again, the lantern light catching the moisture and casting glimmers across her pale cheeks. "I feel as though I am drowning," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I cannot speak to anyone in the house. I cannot bear my husband's absence, and yet his presence is everywhere. The weight of his expectations, the silence of his disregard." Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face. Thomas knelt beside her, careful, maintaining a respectful distance, his eyes soft and attentive. "I cannot imagine what it is to live with such emptiness," he said quietly. "But I can offer you what little solace I may, if you allow it." She looked up at him, her breath catching at the nearness, at the sincerity in his gaze. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the storm outside framing their shared vulnerability. Every flicker of candlelight cast shadows that seemed to breathe with them, heightening the intimacy, the tension, the peril of their connection. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Afraid of how I feel, afraid of what it might mean. For both of us." Thomas's voice was soft, careful, yet filled with the weight of his own suppressed emotions. And I am afraid too, mistress. Afraid that one misstep, one word, one glance could ruin everything. And yet, I cannot deny that I feel something too. Something I should not. The words hung between them, charged with danger, desire, and unspoken understanding. She swallowed hard, unable to move, unable to speak, feeling the storm of emotions inside her mirror the storm outside. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, walls closing in, the single lantern casting their faces into sharp relief, highlighting the tension, the longing, the fear. Thomas extended a hand, almost imperceptibly, as if offering a lifeline rather than a transgression. Her hand hovered above his for a moment, quivering, before she allowed it to rest lightly against his. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a shiver through her entire body, an acknowledgement of the bond forming between them, fragile yet undeniable. "Mistress," he murmured, voice low, almost trembling, "I do not wish to bring you pain. I do not wish—" "Shah!" she interrupted, her finger pressing gently to his lips. "Do not speak. I, I want only this for a moment. To feel. Not alone." They remained in silence, the storm outside a constant roar, the rain a rhythm that matched the rapid beating of her heart. Her hand lingered against his, tentative, trembling, and he mirrored her hesitancy, careful, aware of the danger in every motion. Yet the connection was undeniable, electric, intoxicating, and forbidden. The lantern flickered, and a gust of wind rattled the door. Both of them jumped slightly, the spell broken, the reminder of peril intruding upon their stolen intimacy. Eliza pressed her hand to her chest, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "We must be careful," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Thomas nodded, his hand slowly withdrawing, though his eyes never left hers. "We must," he agreed. "But know this, mistress. I am here. I will not abandon you, even in secrecy, even in danger, even when the world forbids it." Her lips trembled, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. I do not know how I shall endure this," she admitted. "This longing, this connection. It frightens me more than the storm." Thomas's gaze softened, filled with a quiet intensity. "And yet, it exists," he said, voice almost a whisper. "It exists, and it cannot be undone. Not by fear, not by circumstance, not by the walls that surround us." The storm outside began to wane slightly, the rain thinning to a steady patter, the wind easing. The candlelight flickered, shadows stretching and dancing across the cabin walls. In that fragile space, time seemed suspended, leaving only the two of them, bound together by shared peril, forbidden longing, and the unspoken promise of something neither could yet name. Eliza's hand lingered in his for a moment longer, hesitant, trembling, and then she slowly withdrew it, as though obeying an unspoken rule. "I must return to the house," she said, her voice barely audible. "They will notice my absence. I cannot stay." Thomas nodded, eyes dark and serious, yet a flicker of something, regret, longing, perhaps hope, shone through. "I understand," he murmured. "Go, mistress. Return safely, and think of this night, as I shall." She rose, wrapping her cloak tightly around herself, feeling the cool dampness against her skin, and stepped toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back, meeting his gaze one last time. In that look, they shared everything words could not contain: fear, desire, longing, and the dangerous thrill of their forbidden connection. As she disappeared into the shadows, returning to the plantation house, Thomas remained in the cabin, watching the flickering lantern, listening to the fading storm. His chest tightened with longing and worry. He knew that every meeting, every touch, every shared moment of vulnerability increased the stakes exponentially. Yet he could not bring himself to regret a single second, for in that fleeting candlelit sanctuary, they had both glimpsed a truth they could not ignore. Eliza crept back into the house, her body chilled, her heart racing, yet something vital had shifted inside her. She could not unsee Thomas, could not unfeel the heat of his hand, the weight of his gaze, the careful tenderness he had offered in that fragile cabin. And she knew, with a fearsome clarity, that their connection, dangerous, forbidden, and intoxicating, was only beginning. The days passed in a haze of duty and pretense for Eliza. The Wentworth plantation was alive with the usual clamor, the overseer's harsh commands, the rhythmic labor of the field hands, the endless parade of deliveries and social visits. Yet each task, each forced smile, was a reminder of the prison in which she lived. Her mind, restless and fevered, returned constantly to Thomas. The memory of his touch, his steady gaze, the quiet intensity of his words. Thomas, too, carried the weight of their encounters like a shadow over his days. Every glance from her across the dining hall, every brief, perfunctory nod, set his heart racing. He moved carefully among the other slaves, always watchful, always measured, aware that a single misstep could endanger them both. And yet, he could not stop thinking of her. It was a late afternoon when the next opportunity presented itself. Eliza had arranged it with careful signals. A dropped handkerchief near the garden gate, a delayed candlelight in her window, a footstep retraced to ensure privacy. Thomas met her where the wildflowers had begun to reclaim a corner of the garden, the last light of day glimmering weakly through storm clouds that threatened another downpour. "Mistress," he murmured, his voice taut with both relief and tension. "I feared you might not come." "I had to," she replied softly, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "I cannot endure the house, the quiet, the endless pretending." Her hands trembled slightly, and she gripped the edge of the garden gate. "I feel as though I am suffocating." Thomas took a careful step closer. "You will not suffocate while I am here. I will not allow it." The intensity in his voice made her shiver. He was close enough that she could see the sharp angles of his face, the subtle lines of strain around his eyes, the quiet strength he exuded even when weighed down by the burden of his position. The storm arrived suddenly, rain pounding the garden in relentless sheets. Eliza's skirts were drenched almost instantly, clinging to her legs. Without hesitation, Thomas pulled her beneath the low roof of a garden arbor, shielding her from the worst of the storm. Their faces were inches apart, shadows of the foliage dancing across them, the scent of wet earth surrounding them. "Mistress," Thomas whispered, his hand hovering near hers, a tentative bridge across propriety and desire. "We are in danger even here. We cannot linger for long." "I do not care," she said softly, her voice trembling with the force of her emotions. "I cannot be without you." She glanced down at the hand he had offered, a silent invitation, and slowly let her fingers brush against his. The contact, so delicate and fleeting, made her chest ache with longing and fear. Thomas's heart ached at her words. He pressed his lips together, trying to steady himself. Every inch of space between them screamed danger, yet he could not resist the pull. "I cannot not feel the same," he admitted, voice low, "though it is perilous. Every moment brings risk. Yet, yes," she whispered, cutting him off. "Every moment is worth it." Their stolen time stretched, measured by the storm's rhythm and the silence of the house behind them. The garden, hidden behind high walls and ancient hedges, became a sanctuary, a forbidden world where their connection could exist, fragile but undeniable. Hands brushed, glances lingered longer than propriety allowed, and their voices dropped to hushed tones that matched the intimacy of the night. Later that week, another opportunity arose. The wine cellar, a place rarely visited, dark and cavernous beneath the main house, became their meeting point. Thomas had managed to slip the keys into a small pouch he carried, and Eliza's heartbeat thundered as she descended the narrow, winding stairs into the cool, musty air. "Thomas," She breathed as she reached the bottom, the faint glow of a single lantern illuminating the rough stone walls. "It feels dangerous here." "And it is," he replied, stepping closer, careful to keep the shadows between them thick. "But it is also private. Few ever come here. Few notice what we do not say aloud." The air in the cellar was damp, smelling of earth and oak barrels filled with wine. Their hands brushed as she accepted the lantern he held, and the contact made her shiver. He did not pull away. Instead, he let the warmth of his presence settle against her. Every stolen second, every touch, every whispered word became more intoxicating, more essential, as though the cellar itself had been built for moments like this. I fear," Eliza whispered, leaning against the cold stone, "that I am changing, that I am not the same woman I was." Thomas reached out, hesitating a fraction before letting his hand rest lightly on her arm, a feather-light reassurance. "And yet, perhaps, you are finding yourself in ways you could not before, in ways you should not yet, cannot deny." They spoke in hushed tones, the storm outside echoing faintly through the cellar walls, the barrels muffling any chance of discovery. Plans began to take shape in quiet murmurs, whispered discussions of escape, of freedom, of the impossible dream of leaving Georgia for the North, of the risk and peril that loomed over every step. Yet every word, every plan, was infused with the undeniable pull between them, desire tempered by fear, longing restrained by survival. On another night, the barn became their refuge. Horses snorted nervously, stamping hooves on the damp floor, yet the hay-strewn space offered privacy. They met in the loft, where shadows from the lantern flickered across the beams, illuminating glimpses of faces, hands, and trembling breaths. "Every time we meet," Eliza murmured, her voice hushed and fragile, "I feel as though the world shifts, as though, as though nothing else matters." Thomas's voice was low, heavy with emotion. "I feel it too, mistress. But we must tread carefully. Each stolen moment is precious and perilous." They lingered in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the overseer's steps, the creaking of the plantation settling, the soft rustle of animals. Yet in the shadows, they found solace, an intimacy that went beyond touch, an emotional closeness that neither dared to name fully, but both knew existed. Time and again, they risked discovery. Each near encounter, an approaching overseer, a servant's unexpected presence, the creak of a floorboard, heightened the thrill, the fear, and the connection between them. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every whispered word became a defiance of the rigid world they inhabited. And yet, amid the danger, they began to plan. Escape was a word they could not speak aloud, but the thought lingered in the shadows between them, in the stolen moments in barns, wine cellars, and gardens. They imagined the river carrying them north, the fields receding behind them, freedom shimmering on the horizon. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word strengthened that plan, binding them together in ways neither could have anticipated. Yet the world outside remained merciless. The plantation continued its relentless rhythm, the overseer's harsh commands echoing across the fields, the distant laughter of servants and neighbors reminding them that they were trapped in a system that would not forgive. And still, in the hidden corners, beneath the storm-washed moonlight, in the damp hay of a barn, in the cool darkness of a wine cellar, they found each other. Every meeting brought them closer, closer in spirit, closer in longing, closer in a dangerous intimacy that neither could ignore. The fear of discovery sharpened their senses, heightened their emotions, made every glance, every touch, every whispered word a precious treasure. And through it all, the thought of escape lingered, a fragile thread of hope amidst the peril, binding them together, shaping every heartbeat. every decision, every breath. By the time dawn approached, Eliza would return to the house, soaked, shivering, yet alive in a way the plantation had never allowed. Thomas would retreat to his quarters, heart pounding, yet carrying the warmth of her hand, the intensity of her gaze, and the knowledge that each secret meeting, each dangerous embrace, brought them one step closer to something both terrifying and inevitable. The sun had not yet risen over the Wentworth plantation, and the house lay in near silence, the distant fields shrouded in mist. Eliza awoke with a start, her heart still heavy from the restless sleep filled with dreams of Thomas. The intensity of their secret meetings, the warmth of his hands, the brush of his fingers in the moonlit field. Every heartbeat reminded her of the danger that had shadowed them since the first encounter at the river. Yet she could not deny the pull that had grown between them, stronger with each stolen moment. She dressed quickly, careful to avoid the creaking floorboards, and slipped from her room. The storm from days past had left the world wet and fragrant, the scent of rain-soaked earth rising from the fields. She moved swiftly, silently, toward the barn where Thomas had agreed to meet her. Each step was measured, each sound in the early morning amplified in her awareness. The plantation seemed almost spectral in the dim pre-dawn light, the mist curling around the trees like ghostly fingers. Thomas waited, as always, his posture alert, eyes scanning the perimeter. When he saw her approach, relief softened the tension in his features. But there was also a shadow of worry. "Mistress," he whispered, stepping forward, careful to keep their meeting brief yet intimate. "You should not be out here. The overseer patrols the fields at this hour, and the men are restless after the storm. I had to see you," she said softly, stepping closer. Her voice carried both urgency and a tremor of fear. I cannot endure the waiting, the secrecy. Not any longer." Thomas reached out, his hand brushing hers briefly, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of months of suppressed longing. "Every meeting brings danger, mistress," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. "And yet, I cannot resist the pull between us, nor could I ever pretend it does not exist." The barn was silent save for the occasional snort from the horses, the rustling of hay, and the distant wind tugging at the wooden slats. Shadows played across the beams and the walls, elongating their forms, mirroring the tension that crackled between them. Every stolen glance, every brush of fingers, every whispered word felt monumental, charged with forbidden desire and the weight of survival. "I have been thinking," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination, "about escape, about leaving this place, leaving Georgia. If we are to be together, we cannot remain here." Thomas's dark eyes widened slightly, the intensity in them betraying both hope and trepidation. "Mistress, to leave is a risk unlike any we have faced. If we are caught—" His voice faltered, the weight of consequences heavy in the quiet morning. "It could mean death, for me, for you, and yet—" He exhaled slowly, meeting her gaze, the silent acknowledgement of shared risk, shared longing, and shared daring passing between them. "And yet," she echoed, voice soft, almost a whisper, "it is the only path left to us. Every day, every meeting is a risk. But I cannot bear a life without you." Her words trembled, her hands reaching for his, though she stopped just short, aware of the danger of too much proximity in this exposed space. They lingered a moment longer, hands almost touching, breaths mingling with the scent of damp hay and rain-soaked wood. The barn, a place meant for animals and labor, had become a sanctuary, a fragile world where the rules of the plantation did not fully apply. And yet, they were painfully aware of the ever-present eyes of the overseer, the possibility of discovery, the heavy chains of the law and society that loomed over them both. I have thought of a plan, Thomas said finally, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. We would need to leave at night, cross the river before the patrols are aware, and make our way north. Slowly, carefully. There are safe houses, routes used by those who have escaped before. But every step is perilous. Eliza nodded, absorbing his words, feeling the weight of their reality. I am ready, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I will face the danger. I will face anything. If it means we can be free together. The early light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the barn, glinting off the damp surfaces, casting the space into a harsh clarity. The beauty of the morning, soft, silver, fragile, belied the danger that surrounded them. Eliza stepped closer, and for the first time, Thomas allowed his hands to rest lightly on her shoulders, feeling the warmth and fragility of her. Their proximity was electric, the tension between desire and survival nearly unbearable. A sudden creak of the barn door startled them both. They froze, hearts hammering, every nerve alert. Through the small opening, a figure appeared, an overseer, suspicious and early for rounds, his lantern swinging in the dim light. Eliza's breath caught, and Thomas's jaw tightened. Mistress Wentworth, the man called, voice sharp, questioning. Eliza's hands trembled. I was. Checking on the horses, she stammered, voice barely audible, feigning calm. The overseer's eyes narrowed, his suspicions rising. He took a step forward, lantern illuminating the space between them. Thomas instinctively moved to position himself closer to Eliza, a silent shield. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching into eternity. But before the man could speak again, a loud clatter from the far end of the barn drew his attention. An overturned bucket, the horses shifting nervously, and his gaze flickered away just long enough for Thomas to guide Eliza behind a stack of hay bales. They held their breath, hearts pounding, as the overseer muttered under his breath and disappeared, distracted by the chaos. They exhaled in unison, the danger passing for the moment, but leaving an ache of adrenaline and relief. Eliza's hands were shaking as she pressed them to her chest. Every moment, every glance, it could be the last, she whispered. Thomas reached for her hand, gently, reverently. And yet, I would risk it 1,000 times for you, mistress. Every day, every night, every stolen moment. I cannot deny it. I cannot hide it. You are everything I have longed for. Her eyes filled with tears, her chest heaving. And you are my heart, Thomas. In a world that would never allow it, you are the only truth I know. I cannot. I cannot bear to imagine life without you. They stood together in the barn, shadows cast by the early dawn, the smell of hay and earth surrounding them. The danger outside a sharp reminder of their precarious existence. And yet, in that moment, nothing mattered but the intensity of their connection, the forbidden bond they had nurtured in stolen hours and secret corners of the plantation. They spoke in whispers then, voices low and urgent, outlining their plan once more. Each step, each precaution, each hidden route they would take, carefully, deliberately, until freedom was within reach. Yet even as they whispered, the fear of discovery lingered like a shadow over their hearts. Every glance toward the barn door, every sound from the fields, reminded them that one mistake could undo everything. Finally, as the sun began to rise, they parted, each retreating to their respective worlds. Eliza returned to the house, her skirts wet, her heart still racing, and Thomas to his quarters, chest tight with longing and the weight of responsibility. Yet the memory of their touch, the intensity of their gaze, the warmth of their hands, lingered like a flame that refused to be extinguished. Days passed, and their clandestine meetings continued, each encounter more daring, more intimate, more laden with peril. Every secret shared, Every whispered word, every stolen touch bound them together, intertwining their fates in ways neither could escape. Yet the world outside remained merciless. Rumors began to stir among the servants. The overseer grew more watchful, and the distant presence of her husband loomed like a shadow over every decision. The possibility of discovery, of punishment, of tragedy became ever more real. On the eve of what they hoped would be their final escape, they met once more beneath the oak tree, the river glinting silver in the moonlight. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. "Mistress," Thomas whispered, his hand hovering near hers, "tonight, we leave. We take the river, follow the safe houses north. We must not hesitate." Liza's hands trembled as she took his, gripping them tightly. "I am ready," she said, her voice resolute. "I will face anything as long as it is with you." They lingered in the moonlight, the river whispering below, the shadows of the plantation stretching like silent witnesses to their daring plan. And in that fragile, dangerous space, they shared a final, lingering glance, full of longing, fear, and a desperate hope for freedom. As they slipped into the night, hearts racing, the world seemed to hold its breath. Their future was uncertain, every step fraught with danger. But in that moment, neither cared. They had each other, and that was enough to ignite the courage to defy the world that sought to keep them apart. And though the plantation loomed behind them, the river before them, and the unknown stretched endlessly ahead, they walked hand in hand, bound by love, fear, and the unbreakable bond forged in storms, candlelight, and moonlit fields. The story of Eliza Wentworth and Thomas, their forbidden love, their stolen moments, and their daring attempt at freedom would echo in the plantation's halls long after their departure or their discovery. And while the future remained uncertain, the intensity of their connection, their courage, and the bittersweet beauty of their love endured, as relentless and unyielding as the river that had first witnessed their tears.